Okay, consider this transitions number 2. This is a follow-up to what we spoke about at the Zoom class on Monday. Daniel Shay's rebellion was really a catalyst. It was a wake-up call for us, and some of the correspondence back and forth between people like George Washington, Hamilton, and Adams. Not Adams. I take that back. He was in London. James Madison in particular was how are we going to address the issue? A couple of issues. One of them is mostly the ineffective Articles of Confederation government. So a call goes out in May of 1787 that each state should send delegates or representatives to Philadelphia so they can revise the articles, make it stronger, make it so, for example, that the Confederation government has the authority to collect taxes and that the states cannot just say, no, they're not paying. There were a number of issues, but that was one of the major ones. Rhode Island, the state of Rhode Island decided that they were not interested in creating any kind of stronger national or federal government. So they refused to attend. So you have 12 states, about 55 delegates coming and going whenever they needed to go back home. And the attempt to revise the articles fail. So James Madison, who was already thinking about what might be an alternative, came up with something called the Virginia Plan. And we know that, to try and answer the question, what kind of government do we want? We knew we didn't want a monarchy, that's for sure. A republic, well, that, scared the hell out of us too, because a republic, for the most part, sorry, a republic is a government where the authority of that government rests with the people. And that's what I have, what it says right here. It's a form of government in which the people or our elected representatives, those people that we elect to do our business, possess the supreme power. And what I mean by supreme power is basically we can vote them in and out of office. So we do have an awful lot of power if we choose to use it. And the person you see sitting here is James Madison. James Madison will go on to become our 4th president. But for the most part, he is probably better known as he was the father of the Constitution. So let's see what these delegates, these representatives are going to come up with, okay? You and I have already talked about who should be excluded. Okay. So, and you can see this slide. I have it up, I believe I have it up on Canvas, this particular PowerPoint. Constitution PowerPoint is called. But let's see what Madison has in mind here. And this is what we talked about basically on Monday. James Madison and George Mason were the representatives from the state of Virginia, one of the largest states population-wise. And the Virginia Plan accounted for or called for a bicameral Congress, bicameral meaning 2 houses, as you can see, House of Representatives and the Senate. This was, frankly, what you and I would call part of this great compromise. And as I mentioned on Monday, the word compromise is something that is seen throughout our government, not just today, but even when we were putting together this government, okay, there had to be compromise. If there wasn't compromise, who knows what would have happened. So once it was agreed that we needed a two-house Congress, one House of Representatives, one was called the Senate, the big question became how are what's the representation going to be in those two houses, and this is what we came up with. Okay, the representation in the House was based on population. And of course, Virginia being one of the most populous states, and New York being one of the most populous states, certainly agreed with that. The state of Delaware, with not much population, said, well, what about us? What about us? We're not going to have much of a voice in any kind of government decision making. So in order to make sure that the smaller populated states, or the states with the least amount of population, would have certainly some clout and some power in the government for decision making, the representation in the Senate was going to be equally based, which basically means every state today has two senators. So the state of California, with 40 million people today, has two senators. The state of Wyoming, with 900,000 people, probably have more critters and varmints than they do people, have two senators also. So basically what you're looking for is, wait a minute, doing this backwards here, is balance, okay? You're looking for balance in the government. And you're probably saying, well, how long did that take? Probably a month or two. This was not the really big issue. We had one compromise, and it was called the Great Compromise, and we already decided that. Next question. What do we do with the slaves? And the question was, should they be counted for representation purposes? Well, if we were in class, we would certainly divide the class into two sides and have a discussion over this. Separate the class into northern states and into southern states. And you probably already know that southern states, particularly the state of South Carolina, who was sort of leading the charge in this question, said, we will be counting our slaves. They should absolutely be counted for representation purposes. Northern states, on the other hand, said, why? You already told us they're not people. They're property. So how can you just expect us to go along with this idea? And this is where the entire discussions of the Constitutional Convention get hung up. It'll take months to figure this one out. And it was during this time when the question of slavery as an institution becomes a relatively hot question. There were states in the North already that had prohibited slavery in their state constitutions. Others, like the state of Massachusetts, was going to outlaw slavery and prohibit it on a gradual basis. But the southern states from South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, and certainly the state of Virginia, all needed slavery, they said, because of their economy. If they did not have slaves, their economy would be ruined. And of course, they tied their economy to the economy of the entire new nation. So they kind of had the North over a barrel, if you want to say. And this is how they came to the compromise that eventually happens. Okay. This is the 3/5 compromise. This is Alexander Hamilton, by the way. Solution: count the slaves, but only count them as 3/5 of a free man for both representation and taxation purposes. Slaves were counted for taxation purposes, which meant more dollars would be paid from the southern states to the new federal government that they were creating. And slaves were counted for House representation, which meant that the South would have more clout, more power in the House of Representatives. Was this a perfect compromise? No. Were both sides happy? No. But as Ben Franklin said, this is the best we're going to get. If you want a government, then we are going to have to come to grips with the fact that this is an issue that will continually probably haunt us. And well, we know that too well. It certainly did. So I'm going to stop here. And tomorrow when I meet with you, I will address any questions you might have. And we'll continue with our story, okay? Bye.